Welcome to Shot Creation, a cinematographer's approach to narrative framing. In this video, we explore how every shot is a storytelling decision. Whether you're behind the camera or directing from the monitor, your choices shape how the audience sees, feels, and understands the story. Let's begin with the smallest unit of visual storytelling, the shot. A shot is a single, uninterrupted take captured by the camera. It begins when the camera starts rolling and ends when it stops. But a shot is more than just a technical unit. It's a narrative decision. It defines what is seen, how it is seen, and why it is seen. Every shot carries emotional weight, spatial logic, and storytelling intent. Now let's zoom out. If a shot is the smallest unit, what comes next? Multiple shots form a scene. A scene is a unit of story that unfolds in continuous time and space. It typically involves a specific set of characters and actions. In Philippine screenwriting, we often use the term sequence to mean the same thing as scene, and each sequence number in a screenplay refers to one scene. So when we say sequence 5, we mean a single dramatic unit, not a group of scenes as it is typically understood. The earlier shot belongs to this scene. Notice how it needed 13 shots to play out this part of that scene. Now let's watch these shots play out together. It is a 1-minute excerpt taken from a 3-minute, 32-second scene, which is actually quite long for a film. Western references use sequence to describe a group of scenes linked by theme or style, like an action sequence or dream sequence. We use this too sometimes, but in our local practice, scene and sequence are interchangeable. Here is an example of a sequence that is linked by one key thought across different scenes. It cannot be considered one scene despite all scenes happening in one location because they happen at different days and times, which has production implications. Let's watch. Importantly, a sequence number doesn't refer to a single shot, unless it is a one-shot scene. There's no minimum running time or number of shots for a scene. It can be just a few seconds long, as long as it fulfills its narrative function. A phone call scene, for example, might be composed of one shot, but it's still a scene if it conveys a complete dramatic idea. It's crucial to remember that a shot evolves. It rarely stays fixed. It can shift in many different ways, as you can see in these shots from the previous sequence. The subject may change, subjects may multiply, or the position of the subject within the frame may be reoriented. This is why the creation of a shot is not merely capturing something that unfolds in front of us. It is a layered act of construction and expression. So what are these layers of shot creation? Each shot is built through 4 core layers, which means that these layers are always present in a shot, even if sometimes it feels like they're not. These help us move from instinct to intention, from what we see to what we want to say. First, we identify the subject, who or what the shot is about. Next, we define the shot size, how much of that subject is visible. Then we consider the technical construction, the tools and settings that shape how the shot is built. Finally, we look at motion, how movement within, around, and across the frame affects how the shot is experienced. These layers work together to shape not just the image, but the story it tells. The first layer of shot creation is the most important, and often most taken for granted: the subject. Every shot is about something. Identifying the subject is the first act of storytelling. It's what gives the shot its meaning. As such, shot size is always defined in relation to the subject. If the subject changes, the shot size changes, even if the frame doesn't. Those new to visual storytelling often assume that once something is in the frame, the job is done. But what or who is in the frame, how much of them we see, what else surrounds them, and where the viewer's attention falls at any given moment must all be deliberately orchestrated. The subject isn't always the person in the center of the frame. It's the element the shot is about. That could be a person, an object, a location, or even an idea. This is where narrative expression begins to emerge. Is the shot about a person's emotion, a location's atmosphere, or an object's significance? Identifying the subject is the first step in shaping what the audience will feel or understand. At the start of the sequence we watched earlier, we established George, played by Sara Geronimo, represented by the red dot, as the sole subject. She is consistently placed on the left side of the dividing line. This anchors her identity in the frame and sets the audience's expectation that she owns that space. Andrew, played by Gerald Anderson, and represented by the yellow dot, soon enters the frame on the right side of the dividing line. Now we have two subjects, and the audience's attention begins to flip-flop deliberately between them. Sometimes the frame privileges George, sometimes Andrew, and sometimes they exclusively occupy the frame, depending on narrative emphasis. At key moments, the two subjects are made to share the frame. Their proximity and interaction visually signaling connection, tension, or intimacy. The meet-cute reaches its turning point when Andrew crosses the dividing line and they switch places. The reversal is no accident. It is a choreographed moment that signals a shift in their dynamic. Andrew's initial obliviousness gives way to insistent pursuit, while George's tentative wariness sharpens into impatient resistance. Towards the end of the sequence, Andrew begins to creep closer and closer to the middle, visually encroaching on George's space. George, in turn, is staged to pull away from him, reinforcing the push-pull dynamic of romantic comedy. This spatial choreography embodies the cat-dog energy of the genre: playful opposition, reluctant attraction, and eventual collision. The animation of red and yellow dots makes visible what filmmakers often take for granted. Subject placement is never neutral. Who is in the frame, how much of them we see, and where they are positioned are all deliberate choices that orchestrate attention, and encode relationship. Once we've identified the subject, the next layer is shot size. How much of that subject is visible in the frame? Shot size is the most accessible way to describe a shot. It's the language used across sets and scripts. Let's get a medium shot, or we need a close up here. But shot size is never absolute, it's always relative to the subject. A wide shot of a person is not the same as a wide shot of a building. This is why subject identification comes first, because it defines the frame's relationship to meaning. Shot size also carries emotional weight. A close up can feel intimate or intense. A wide shot can feel distant or isolating. In the next few slides, we'll look at how I name and use shot sizes in my own production set. In our production set, we use the cluster of wide shots to refer to shots that emphasize location. Let's use the opening shots of this sequence. Among the commonly used terms, wide, full, long, wide implies the largest scale, so we use it for landscape shots, regardless of the setting. A wide shot of the beach, the mountains, the street, or the cityscape. Even when we make sure that specific elements in the frame identify its specific location, like Boracay or El Nido, instead of just a random beach, the scale still centers on the setting. In contrast, a full shot is always clearly related to a distinct subject as opposed to a general setting. It's often a person, like this shot of Gerald in the movie. But we also use it for elements of a location, like a full shot of this car, or a full shot of the house, or the boat, the bus stop. It shows how the subject moves, behaves, or interacts within a space that's still readable and emotionally grounded. Meanwhile, the long shot, for me, implies distance from the subject. Whether it's significant or a little distance, long is definitely wider than a full shot, but always relational to a distinct subject. Not too long that the subject blends into the background. I use it when I want to show the subject within the environment, like a long shot of the protagonist walking across the pier, or the boat docked beside other vessels. This naming logic helps us communicate clearly across departments. But beyond naming, we also consider what elements are seen in the frame. If the shot is about how a character engages with the environment, we might use a full shot where the frame is equally shared by the setting and the character, like how George and Andrew enjoy this view atop a building. If the shot is about the environment, we include elements that define the environment, like the mountain, the sea, the bleachers, or the highways. In our first example, we establish the beautiful, intimidating house of Andrew's girlfriend, Melissa. If we want to show the scale of the location in relation to the character, a long shot is often more appropriate. A wide shot risks obscuring the subject, like how we almost missed George in the previous shot, if not for his red shirt. A full shot risks flattening the location. A long shot balances both, just like Andrew arriving at this beautiful outdoor museum that George is dressing up for a date. Once we've established the environment, we move closer. In our production set, we use the category of medium shots to frame the subject in a way that foregrounds action and interaction. While we still get a sense of the environment, especially in the context of the preceding or succeeding shots, the medium shot focuses on what the character is doing, how they move, speak, and relate to others. It's the most versatile shot size for capturing performance, dialogue, and relational dynamics. Let's watch this short scene composed of almost entirely medium shots. In our lexicon, we break mediums down into three types, each defined by framing cut, functional use, and relational proximity. Medium full shot is framed below the waist, or anywhere between the cowboy and just before the full shot. It is used for full body gestures, relational dynamics, and stylized movement. It can include interactions in normal or ordinary proximity. Wide medium shot is framed at the waist. It's slightly wider than a medium shot. It's used for bigger actions and interactions in familiar proximity. Medium shot is framed at the elbow or belly button. It is used for dialogue, reaction, and emotional pacing. It focuses on facial expression and upper body gesture. It's also used for intimate interactions that can still be framed. Let's start with the obvious. Talking is the most common action a character performs. And that's why the medium shot is the default for dialogue. Medium shots also begin to reveal personal and intimate details. Not just expressions, but hairstyles, clothing, accessories, and quirks. We notice mismatched earrings or unpressed shirts. We notice bruised ribs or ink stained fingers. These details help us understand a character's personality, background, and emotional state. The term medium also carries emotional weight. It's the midway between action and emotion. It's close enough to read a character's face, but wide enough to show what they're doing. That's why it's ideal for scenes of intimacy, conflict, and connection. Medium shots are also where interaction begins. When a character engages with another person, object, or space, we often use a medium shot. And when that interaction involves more than one character, we shift into multi-subject framing. Not every shot is about one person. Sometimes we frame two, three, or even more characters. But remember, just because someone is in the frame doesn't mean they're a subject. How do we frame for clarity when there's more than one person in the shot? In our shot creation framework, the subject is who or what the shot is about. So when we use terms like two-shot, three-shot, or crowd shot, we're referring to the number of human subjects receiving equal or considerable attention. They usually use the wide and medium shots because they can accommodate more subjects. A two-shot means both characters are readable, emotionally and physically. A three-shot implies all three are active subjects. But if one person is in tight foreground and barely readable, it might actually be a dirty two-shot, not a three-shot. Dirty framing refers to when a secondary figure is present but not the focus. It's common in over the shoulder setups or reaction shots. This is why it is important to always be conscious of who the shot is really about, if all visible characters are receiving narrative attention, and if the framing is supporting their emotional or dramatic function. Multi subject framing is not just about numbers, it's about narrative clarity. And it still begins with the subject layer. Let's see all of those demonstrated in this next scene. Finally, we arrive at the shots where emotions live, the close ups. It magnifies the subject's face, isolating expressions, micro reactions, and minute details that reveal inner states. We see trembling lips, furrowed brows, tear lines, and clenched jaws. We also notice tiny quirks: freckles, smudged eyeliner, chipped nails, or a twitch in the cheek. In our lexicon, we define close up variants by framing cut and emotional proximity. Medium close up. This is framing from above the elbow or the chest upwards. This is not quite a close up, but almost, in the same way that a medium full shot is not the full height of a subject. This is ideal for emotional dialogue and subtle tension. Close up. This is framing from above the chest or the collarbone. This focuses on facial expressions and emotional intensity. The extreme close up is super tight on the face, sometimes uncomfortably so. It cuts off parts of the face like the hair, head, or chin. It is also used for dramatic punctuation or hyper-specific detail like the lips or the eyes. Extreme here means the tightest possible framing, just as an extreme wide shot means the widest. Close ups are powerful because they strip away context. They focus entirely on the subject's emotional truth. This makes them ideal for escalation, punctuation, and coverage. But that isolation also makes them easier to cheat. Because the environment is often blurred or cropped out, we can shoot close ups in different locations or times and stitch them into a scene. Medium shots, by contrast, are harder to cheat because they reveal both gesture and spatial logic. If the background shifts or the blocking doesn't match, the audience will feel it. Let's summarize what we've covered so far. Shot size isn't just about how much we see. It's about what the frame is trying to say. Each size carries its own emotional weight, narrative function, and relational logic. We started with the category of wide shots, used to establish location, scale, and distance. Then we moved into the medium shot family, where action, gesture, and interaction take center stage. Then we zoomed into the cluster of close-up shots, where emotion, detail, and intensity are foregrounded. But of course, there are exceptions. A close-up of an empty chair might communicate abandonment or loss, using a close-up for location. A wide shot of a lone, indistinguishable figure in a meadow might evoke isolation, using a wide shot for emotion. Bigger motions, like running, diving, or sparring, might be better framed in full shots or even wider. And sometimes a close up, like that of a hand doing intricate embroidery, might depict an action more effectively than a mid shot. This is why we emphasize narrative function over rigid rules. These guides aren't meant to restrict you. They're meant to help you understand what technical components you can control and what elements within the shot are at your disposal. Ultimately, it's about telling the story, communicating ideas, and eliciting emotion. There is no one way to do that. We learn these rules to become masters of them, so that when the moment calls for it, we can trust our instincts to break them. Now that we've defined shot size and subject, let's move into the third layer of shot creation: camera orientation. How we position the camera in space to shape what the viewer sees and feels. Imagine the subject as the center of a circle. The camera can be placed anywhere along the circumference, but its effect depends on four key components: where it's facing, how far it is from the subject, how high or low it is, and what lens it's using. These are the technical components that define camera orientation. They're modular, adjustable, and deeply expressive. Together, they determine the viewer's vantage point, and that means they shape emotion, clarity, and meaning. Let's begin unpacking the components of camera orientation with the only one based on equipment: focal length, or the lens we choose. Students should already know that focal length affects angle of view, how much of the scene is captured. But it also affects magnification, how large the subject appears in the frame. But lens alone isn't enough. To truly understand how a shot feels, we also need to consider how far the camera is from the subject. Distance is the physical radius that defines intimacy, emphasis, and scale. It directly affects shot size, but also shapes how intimate or detached the viewer feels. Even if the lens stays the same, changing the distance changes the shot. Distance also interacts with angle and height. So when we adjust distance, we're adjusting emphasis. What do we want the viewer to feel? What do we want them to focus on? Now that we've explored how far the camera is from the subject, let's look at how high or low the camera is placed. This is height, the camera's vertical elevation relative to the subject. Height corresponds to the y-axis in spatial logic. It affects how the viewer is aligned with the subject, physically and emotionally. At eye level, it could communicate neutral, balanced, or conversational. At a high angle, it could be making the subject vulnerable or making the viewer look down on the subject. Low angle could mean the subject is empowered or the viewer looks up to the subject. Ground level or overhead could be stylized, symbolic, or detached. Even if distance and angle stay the same, changing the height reshapes the emotional tone. Height is how we align the viewer's gaze, and that means it's how we align their empathy. Now that we've explored lens, distance, and height, let's complete our camera orientation layer with the final component: angle. The camera's position along the horizontal circumference around the subject. A side angle may emphasize context, space, or relationships. Imagine the subject at the center of a circle. Angle is the degree along that circle, like a compass. Frontal could be direct, honest, or exposed. Changing the angle changes what the viewer sees, but more importantly, it changes what the viewer feels. A profile or from the back could mean private, observational. Angle also determines what part of the environment is revealed in relation to the subject. A frontal angle may show the subject's face and background. Even if distance and height stay the same, changing the angle reshapes the shot's meaning. Angle is how we shape perspective, and perspective is how we shape power. Camera orientation, the third layer of shot creation, determines how the camera's placement around the subject affects perspective, emotion, and meaning. It is composed of four technical components: the focal length, the lens we choose; distance, how far the camera is from the subject; height, how high or low the camera is placed; and angle, where the camera is positioned around the subject. Shot size, our second layer of shot creation, is primarily shaped by the first three components. They work together to determine how large the subject appears in the frame. Together, all four components define the viewer's vantage point, and that means they sculpt emotion, clarity, and meaning. We now arrive at the fourth and final layer of shot creation: motion, the physical movement captured within the shot. It reminds us that every shot is alive. Motion includes three interlocking components: subject movement, how your subject moves within the frame; camera movement, how you move or control the subject's placement in the frame through camera, lens, or mount motion; viewing movement, how subject movement, camera movement, and composition work together to guide the viewer's eye. Each type of movement shapes how the viewer experiences space, rhythm, and emotion. A walking subject creates momentum and direction. A slow dolly builds emotional gravity. A whip pan creates urgency or chaos. A handheld shot adds immediacy, instability, or intimacy. A static shot holds tension or restraint. But movement isn't just about motion. It's about attention. We use movement to draw the viewer's eye to the subject and other important elements in the frame. Subject movement involves emotional cues and blocking. Camera movement involves spatial emphasis and rhythm. Viewing movement involves dynamic engagement. and visual storytelling. Let's watch this next sequence of scenes where George teaches Andrew lessons on how to be consistent in a relationship. As you do, pay attention to the motion layer, particularly how the subjects of the shots move, the various types of camera movements, and how they all work together to engage you, the viewer. We close this video with coverage. It begins where shot creation ends. Every decision we make, shot size, angle, movement, is a decision about perspective. Coverage is how we apply those decisions to shape what the viewer sees and how they feel about it. In live events like stage plays or concerts, we observe from a single static viewpoint. But in cinema, we create intimacy, as if the viewer is in the story world, with the events unfolding before the viewer's eyes. This is achieved through varying magnification and camera placement. Coverage is not just about having options, it's about constructing meaning through perspective. It's the first step in translating shot creation into visual storytelling. To maintain spatial clarity across shots, we follow the axis of action. How do we determine this? Imagine a scene with two subjects and trace the eye line between them. Now extend that line all the way back, away from them. This imaginary line that runs between the two characters or along the direction of movement is the axis of action. Staying on one side of this line preserves the left-right orientation, producing these two shots that make them look like they're facing each other as they are conversing. Crossing the axis of action flips the screen direction, which can confuse the viewer unless done with intention. The subjects would look like they're looking at the same direction instead of at each other. This is not just a technical rule, it's a principle of perspective. It ensures that our coverage respects the viewer's spatial expectations and maintains continuity across cuts. This is especially important when shooting conversations, movement, or any scene where screen direction matters. While the axis of action preserves spatial orientation, the 30-degree rule ensures that each new shot feels like a meaningful shift in perspective. This rule states that the camera should move at least 30 degrees around the subject between consecutive shots. If the angle change is too small, the result is a jump cut, a jarring, unnatural shift that disrupts continuity and draws attention to the cut itself. The 30-degree rule is not just about camera placement, it's about editorial rhythm. It reminds us that coverage must anticipate the edit. It's a principle of visual clarity, not just a technicality. Coverage isn't just about capturing options. It's about empowering post-production. Once we've respected spatial logic and avoid jump cuts, we can now use coverage to shape the edit itself. Coverage is necessary for editing. For pace, you can only control rhythm if you have enough shots. Without cutaways, you're trapped in long takes. For continuity of action, coverage conceals the seams between the takes. For focus of the scene, coverage lets you shift emphasis on a reaction, gesture, or a line based on performance or story needs. Coverage may seem impractical, but it's the most important consideration when planning shots. Not time, not style. It's how we preserve narrative flexibility. One of the most widely used strategies for ensuring full coverage is the master scene construction method. It's a traditional technical approach that captures the scene from wide to close, ensuring flexibility in post production. The structure typically includes an establishing shot, a wide shot of the entire scene, over the shoulder shots for each character, medium close ups for performance detail, and reaction shots to capture emotional beats. This method ensures that editors have all the necessary angles and shot sizes to shape rhythm, continuity, and emphasis. It's not always the most creative, but it's one of the most reliable. Coverage isn't just a technical safeguard, it's a way to express what matters in a scene. As storytellers, we can think of coverage as a set of narrative anchors, clusters of shots that serve expressive functions. Wide shots anchor the scene in its location or setting. Medium shots anchor the scene in action and interaction. Close-up shots anchor the scene in its emotion. These anchors help us decide what to shoot based on what the scene needs to convey. They also explain why later scenes in familiar locations can skip certain anchors, like the wide, because the audience already knows the space. Coverage evolves with context, memory, and meaning. This is how we move from coverage as insurance to coverage as expression. Let's watch this scene and how it makes use of the different layers of shot creation and anchoring the scene in narrative expressions. As we close this lecture, let's remember coverage is not just a checklist, it's a commitment to clarity. Whether we use technical terms or personal frameworks, what matters is that we are grounded in the narrative. Pedantic definitions that differ across varying contexts will never get in the way of understanding when we know our subject, the components that we manipulate for camera orientation, the motion that animates our narrative, and the anchors that hold our images in place. Coverage is where shot creation meets editing logic. It's where perspective becomes possibility. And it's where the story stays at the forefront of the film.